The first time I was able to introduce my next guest was way back in Rome, right here in March of 2013. That was the Interregnum and conclave that elected Pope Francis. With me now, once again, the Papal posse, Father Gerald Murray, Robert Royal, delighted to have them with us once again for insight and analysis on the next conclave and what lies ahead. Gents, I want to begin, first of all, it's great to be together here in Rome. Give me a sense of this period. We covered a lot of the Francis legacy last week, but my question first to Father, then to Bob. How is that legacy being received by the cardinals here, gathered, the 100 plus of the 133 electors chosen by Pope Francis himself?
Well, I go back to what Archbishop Chaput wrote in First Things. Candor is what's called for at this time, and some of the cardinals from the reports that we're getting are giving critiques of what's being said inside the general congregation.
Yeah, but how's it being received?
Well, you know, that's a question that we can't answer until we see some of these people come out and speak to the media, because those discussions are not open to the public.
Yeah.
I will say this, in general, the appropriate prayers for the repose of the soul. This is a time of mourning, so we keep that in mind. But the cardinals also know there's an awful lot at stake here. You know, 13 years ago, or 2013 rather, when we were here, we never could have foreseen where we'd be now.
Yeah.
The Pope did so many things that were changes from his predecessors. Yeah. So what's going to happen in the future? I think that's the major question.
Yeah. Bob, what are you hearing from cardinals here?
Well, look, we know that there's been a debate about whether there should be unity going forward, whether there should be some sort of consensus about the choice of the next figure. I think that the criticism of that idea is exactly right on, that what we need right now is a bit more openness in the way that we talk about it. I'm not sure we're getting it. What we hear from a lot of people is there's still, as you would expect, because so many of these cardinals have been appointed by Pope Francis, there's still that lingering sense of being loyal to the man who made them who they are right now. But I think as the days go on, and we know that there are a lot of days between now and the actual beginning of the conclave. The conclave is where they're going to enter into the Sistine Chapel.
A little under a week.
Yeah. For me, the one thing that I'm a bit worried about is a lot of these people don't know one another. This is not really the best time to get to know one another. It would be a lot better if they had spent some years over the last decade and more working on things together, discussing things together. But Francis didn't really like getting the cardinals together so very much. So there could be a lot of surprises coming down. For now, I think that there's a general sense of loyalty to what has been in the past. But I think more and more we're going to start to see some changes and some different voices beginning to come to the fore.
Well, the homilies during these 9 days of mourning are fascinating, because people will remember it was Benedict XVI's homily at the funeral of John Paul II that sort of sealed the deal for him. People heard this and said, this is a prophetic voice, it's a continuation of the legacy, let's go with this. This week we heard from Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals here. He preached at the funeral, but it was a very different tone. He drifted into very political areas, and I want to read a little of this for you. He said, speaking of Pope Francis, his gestures and exhortations in favor of the refugees and displaced persons are countless. His insistence on working on behalf of the poor was constant. It is significant that Pope Francis' first journey was to Lampedusa, an island that symbolizes the tragedy of emigration. I guess my question is, Bob, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the entire, he mentions walls. We can't build walls, we have to build bridges, with Trump and world leaders right there. Did that achieve anything?
I don't think it did. And in fact, this may sound a little harsh, but I think that the Holy Father misread the moment in history. That actually, what we've seen over the last 12 years is that countries here in Europe and also in North America are being inundated by illegal immigration. I mean, this is one of the most hot-button issues, not only in the United States, as we know with the election of President Trump, but here in Italy, you have Giorgia Meloni, who's now the prime minister, who's a conservative, and is trying for all of the European Union to set up a kind of policy that will restrict this unrestricted immigration. And it's also a problem in Austria, in Germany, in France, in England. I think he misread that. And and this is, I think he misread it because he thought of it in terms of not welcoming the stranger or not being open to others. Yes, that is part of Christianity, but in policy terms, most of the developed countries simply cannot take more immigration. They can't integrate people who are coming in, and it's causing severe social tension.
Why lead with that at a funeral?
Right, absolutely.
Father, I have to ask you about this. There was that coda at the very end of Cardinal Ray's homily, where he said, Pope Francis asked us to pray for him, but now we ask him to pray for us. Your reaction to that? And how do you think the Cardinals of the College of Cardinals received that?
Well, the presumption if you ask him to pray for us means he's already in heaven. And the first message of any Christian funeral is pray for the soul of the deceased, because if he's in purgatory, we want his time to be shortened. We want him to be raised up to the glory of heaven. Now, there's a pious, and it's sort of a Catholic tradition that the souls in purgatory can pray for us, so you're not necessarily indicating that he's canonizing him. But sad to say at funerals, and there's a common critique, that you go to a funeral, instead of praying for the soul, everybody is canonized. So, no, we leave the prayers of all of the faithful in the hands of God, including for Pope Francis. But yeah, I was a little unhappy, to be honest. We shouldn't be assuming that he doesn't need our prayers anymore because he's already in heaven.
Well, some saw this as an attempt to sort of rush to the conclave and say, wait, look, we have this saintly Pope. We need to continue his agenda and his vision for the Church.
Well, as the Jesuit general said, the Pope is the successor of Peter, not of Francis. So continuity's got to be with the original message of Christ given to the apostles. And inasmuch as Francis had some difficult teachings, which we've discussed over the years, we don't want any blanket endorsement saying everything that's happened now, nothing can be changed. No, that would be a mistake.
German Cardinal Walter Kasper gave an interview this week with La Repubblica, giving his 2 cents on the kind of man he believes should succeed Pope Francis. He said the people of God have already voted at the funeral, and they have called for continuity with Francis. Casper's 92 years old. He's a non-voting member of the college, caused a lot of mayhem during that family synod where he was the primary advocate for granting communion to divorced and remarried people without an annulment. Your thoughts, Father, first. Do you get the impression that that's what the crowd was saying as they witnessed the funeral here and around the world?
No, the crowd was expressing Catholic piety and devotion to the successor of Peter, gratitude for the many good things that Pope Francis did, gratitude, very much so for his final days when he suffered and yet came out to see the people, and how touching it was to see the Pope greeting children who were presented to him on that at the Mass there on Easter Sunday. No, it's presumptuous and a little bit of politicking to say the crowd has spoken, nothing more needs to be said. Yeah. No, a lot more needs to be said.
Bob, your reaction to that, and I keep thinking of Archbishop Chaput, who said, this is a time for full candor. And in full candor, I have to say, the numbers don't bear that out. No. Talk to that.
Yeah, I was here for the beatification of John Paul II, not the canonization. I think we all did the canonization.
We did it here. Yeah, we anchored it.
And my wife and I were staying in an apartment over here in Piazza di Sorgimento. We couldn't get outside of the apartment.
Yeah.
There were millions of people all over this area. I came over for the funeral the other day, and look, it was a moving event. It always is when there's a pope involved. But if it were not for all the young people, and the young people who are here, by the way, were not here for the Pope. They were here because they were scheduled for the canonization of Carlo Acutis.
That's right.
So it was a nice feel that there were young people here, but they weren't here exactly for him. And the crowd, you don't want to base too much on the size of a crowd, because crowd sizes are always disputed in events like this. But I don't know how Cardinal Kasper, who is distant and, let's say, a bit elderly, was able to gauge where the church ought to go on the basis of who happened to be here in the square.
Wednesday audience attendance and coming here for the Angelus, those numbers you can look up. They were vastly down from Benedict and John Paul II, vastly down. I won't get into them, but we should mention the historic procession of Pope Francis's body through Rome to his chosen place of rest, St. Mary Major Basilica, the first such procession since Pius XII. and the first pope to be buried outside the Vatican since Leo XIII over 100 years ago. So, Bob, how significant was the decision by Francis, even in death, to separate himself from his predecessors? He wanted to be buried not here at the grottos of the Vatican, but...
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, a lot of people are critical of that. They think it's him trying to show himself as different than everybody else, and even his tombstone, because it's so simple, they're critical of that. I'm a little bit skeptical that that's the right way to read it. We know that before and after every trip he took outside of the Vatican, he went to worship with Our Lady, salvation of the Roman people. He had a very strong devotion to Our Lady and that particular icon of the Virgin for the Roman people. So I think we need to cut him a little slack about that. Mm-hmm. And look, it's a very beautiful church there.
Gorgeous, yeah.
I don't want to politicize everything. I think that's it in a nutshell.
You want to add anything to
that?
Yeah,
no, I agree with Bob. You can't read everything that you think into one simple action. But I will say I was very touched watching that coverage of all the Romans who lined the route. There were so many people, families out there, and they were Romans, because this was going through a different neighborhood from where the tourists usually go, the pilgrims. So it was very moving. I mean, there's great love for the Pope, whether you agree or disagree with things that he did, and that was expressed, I think, by the Catholic world.
Yeah. There are 135 electors that could come to the conclave. 2 have now said, one from Spain, one from Kenya, they are bowing out due to illness. So there'll be 133 men here, both of them considered to be traditional. What impact, if any, do you think that has on the outcome here?
You could say numerically not that much, but their presence, of course, is missing, and their contributions to the discussions, the pre-conclave discussions. So, no, it's always a shame when a cardinal can't make it because of illness or extreme age. So now the Holy Spirit has got to work with a smaller group.
Yeah, well, and this is a group of people who really don't know each other. I mean, that's the thing I keep hearing. I know cardinals going in for the first time, and they're like, they feel totally at sea. Some of them were just made cardinals recently, in the last year.
You know, I also think it's regrettable. We sometimes have talked about Pope Francis as not particularly appreciating the United States, but we really should have more Americans in the room who are going to be voting.
Why do you say that?
Well, we don't have a cardinal from Baltimore. We don't have one from Philadelphia.
Los
We don't have one from Los Angeles, which is a huge diocese, and one would have expected that the Archbishop there, who is Hispanic, Jose Gomez, would have been made a cardinal. And instead, what we have are some of those McCarrick cardinals that, let's say, are a problematic group. So, yeah, it's too bad that those 2 aren't here, but there are others who also are missing in an interesting way.
It was announced this week that Cardinal Reinhard Marx, Cardinal Louis Tagle, and Cardinal Dominic Mamberti were all selected by the College of Cardinals in this general congregation to assist the Camerlengo. The Camerlengo is sort of the administrator, Cardinal Kevin Farrell. They will be responsible for organizing the conclave. Now, Cardinal Marx is a major player in the German synodal way. We've talked about him for years now. Tagle in the Philippines is considered to be a front runner for the next pope. And Cardinal Mamberti of France is also the protodeacon of the college and will announce to the world, we have a pope, habemus papam. Your thoughts on this group so close to the organization of this conclave process? I think they were chosen at random.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened, but they're all insiders, we could say, of the Roman Curia, so it represents the curial importance in doing this. It makes a lot of sense that people who are going to be doing protocol things would be familiar with the way things operate here. But it would have been nice if somebody was picked who was a diocesan bishop from, a non-European continent.
Yeah, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts, frankly, about this. I mean, I think we have to see from the results whether this is actually some sort of substantive move to shape the way that the conclave is going to take place, or whether it's just the kind of inside, as Father is talking about, insiders who know a bit about procedure.
I don't want to wade too deeply into this, but we do have to talk about a few of the candidates. We mentioned Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines, whom I interviewed back in 2014 about the family synod and how it was even then wrestling with this idea of granting communion to divorced and remarried Catholics. Listen to this.
Is it possible to envision a policy that would allow Catholics to divorce and remarry without an annulment, given the Church teaching and Christ's teaching on the indissolubility of marriage? Is it possible?
I just came from a meeting of the preparatory committee for the synod. The following things are very clear. The teaching of Jesus and the teaching of the Church will not be changed. No. What people are looking at right now, especially the canonists, is this. No. How could canon law and its procedures, reflect more clearly, the teaching of Jesus Christ, and the teaching of the Church? Because some people are claiming that the canonical procedures are too rigid, and also some are even asking, do the canonical prescriptions, are they clear about the doctrinal basis? Or is the legal canonical path taking its own way quite separately from the doctrinal dimension?
Father, is canon law this malleable? I mean, let's start with, have the teachings of Jesus Christ and the Church changed in this area? I mean, Tagle said it's not changing, but...
No, the teaching cannot change. The teaching is that divorce and remarriage means you're in an adulterous second relationship. Adultery is a mortal sin. You're objectively living in a sinful state if you perjure in an adulterous second union. The charity of the Church is to tell people you don't have to remain in mortal sin. You can leave mortal sin, but if you're consciously disobeying God's law, you cannot receive communion. Now, defending Catholic teaching is not rigidity or legalism. And in fact, it's frustrating and infuriating after so many years, sad to say, of being called backwardists, Pharisees, rigid people. The law based on the gospel is life-giving. This isn't the ancient law of, all the little rules and regulations about how you walk and where you stand. This is about, do I follow what Jesus said, or do I say I have a new and improved version? So, rigidity is a slam word. It's used against people who want to uphold the teaching. I hope that disappears from the vocabulary.
What do you make of Tagle's candidacy? Some are saying he's Francis 2.0.
Yeah. I think that's generally the case. And it's sort of typical of many of the things that we've had to talk about over the past few years, what he said about that. Because, Jesus comes along in a Jewish society that permits divorce and remarriage very easily. So he was stepping out and saying, we're going to do, we're something different. Right. I mean, Moses let you do that because you were weak, but that's not how it was from the beginning. Right. We remember that back in one of the early synods on the family, there was a Latin American cardinal who said, we need to get back to the teachings of Moses, as if we could jump back over Jesus because we want to be merciful toward other people. It's a nonsensical thing that they're trying to push, but they're technically okay. If you look at the language of these documents, it's kind of technically they don't step over, but the implication is always something beyond that.
Well, the implication is practically you can do whatever the hell you want. I'm paraphrasing here. This isn't the document. Practically you can do what you want, but we don't agree with that entirely, but go ahead. You can still go to communion. I mean, it is contradictory, and isn't that the heart? Let's just say it. That really is at the heart of the Francis pontificate. It's the contradiction. We're not changing anything, but everything practically has changed.
Well, let's say blessing gay couples. Okay, we were told the Church blesses everybody. It's true. We do.
Of course.
Don't ask what. But when the two people come together who are involved in a sexual relationship, which is inherently immoral, and they ask for a blessing as a couple, they're wearing rings they put on at their civil marriage ceremony. Blessing them is saying people who engage in sodomy are blessable in that capacity because they're doing it together and we're going to bless them together. Wrong. If the next pope doesn't change that, we're going to have a very serious crisis in the Church.
We're going to turn into Anglicanism.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a column about this earlier in the week called Mercy, 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 as the old title of the song goes. And mercy, of course, is a central concept of both Judaism and Christianity. We believe in a merciful God, but we also believe in a God of justice, of truth, of fidelity. Yeah. And so any one of those virtues, absent the other virtues, If that gets running wild, that's when you get into difficulties. All those must be kept in play at the same time. So we have truth that is faithful to the gospel, but is also merciful.
This whole thing, the conclave we're about to witness and the whole lead up seems to be, and I've talked to a lot of cardinals in my 2 days here, there seems to be a showdown over the synodal way, whether the new way of deciding doctrine and governing the church will continue or die. But do the traditional cardinals have a candidate?
Good question. We can read, what's said. I think there are some outstanding figures who are there who would very clearly say we must return to a defense of the hierarchical nature of the church.
Yeah.
I'll let you name the people, but I'll say this. You have to know theology and canon law to be a competent cardinal. Those that don't need to study, and those that don't know need to listen to ones who have studied. Back to synodality. The idea that we want to involve lay people in the life of the church, that's so obvious everybody knows it. What we don't say is, you're equal to a shepherd. So you get to go to a synod, and the cardinal has the same vote as a grandma. I love grandmas, but they're not cardinals. They're not
and I don't
shepherds.
want them cooking for me. No cardinals in the kitchen. Stay out of the kitchen. Leave that to mama. Your thoughts on this question of the synodality showdown that we're kind of seeing?
It's my belief that we're going to get a modification of mercy with the next pope, probably with a reintroduction of some other elements. And I would not be surprised if synodality just sort of shuffled off this mortal coil, because I don't think it means anything. I don't think it does anything. It's kind of a flag that you can remain faithful to, but whether it's really going to be part of the central self-understanding of the church going forward, especially because in spite of the number of cardinals that the Pope has appointed, I think there could be some surprises here. We know that God is a God of surprises, as Pope Francis told us, and a lot of these men are not tried and true men. We may find that there's a dynamic within the conclave that we're not aware of yet at this point.
I want to move on to Cardinal Joseph Zen, Cardinal Sarah, Cardinal Raymond Burke, all addressed these congregations this week, and I am told their comments were spiritual. They voiced some concern about the Francis legacy, but I'm told they were not warmly received by the overall congregation. Your reaction, why you think that might be happening?
Well, if that's the case, maybe they were a little bit stunned to hear what they were hearing, but perhaps they were just reflecting on what was said. As always, restating Catholic teaching doesn't necessarily produce immediate applause, but it does give people a basis to recenter. And if you're kind of a radical who want to change a lot of things, now they have some arguments they have to respond to. And intellectually honest people just don't ignore what smart and faithful people have to tell them.
Yeah. You want to comment at all on that?
Yeah, I think that we recall the conclave that Francis was elected at. It was during his intervention that he actually rose to greater prominence as a candidate for the papacy. Some people go so far as to say that it was the intervention, as they call these speeches, that he gave during that general congregation that really kind of clinched things for him and put him at the forefront. I think that we keep saying that these cardinals are very new to the job, a lot of them. They don't know a lot about other people, and so it may just be that they were shocked that there was a kind of another line that people were pursuing. I mean, we heard from Cardinal Parolin, that we need to continue the line of mercy, which I think is correct. But is there anything else? I mean, some other things that are going to be brought.
I'm so glad you brought him up, because that was going to be my next question. We've got to get into some of these candidates. I don't want to get too deep, but we owe it to the audience to at least talk about the people who are being most talked about here in Rome and who we're hearing. Secretary of State Pietro Parolin, I guess he lost the job when Pope Francis died, but Parolin, who was Secretary of State, considered a major contender at this conclave. He was, of course, one of the architects of the Vatican-China deal that we've been talking about for years. He's the keeper of that agreement. Your thoughts on that candidacy and what it might mean to the papacy?
Well, he's the best-known cardinal because he's been, as Cardinal Secretary of State in the news. Certainly all the cardinals in Rome would meet him when they were made cardinals.
They know him, yeah.
He's well-known. And he was the one that Pope Francis entrusted his agenda, particularly on the question of the China deal. But that's also, something that he's bearing now around his neck, responsibility for turning over to the Chinese Communist Party the selection of bishops. And we just heard the news yesterday that the Communist Party instrument, which is the Schismatic Patriotic Association, has appointed 2 more bishops. So the China deal, number one, never made public, which is not a good thing. And then secondly, the results have not been a restraint on the part of the Chinese communists from exercising control. So that deal has to be renounced by the next pope. I don't think Cardinal Parolin would do that. Hopefully, if he is elected, he'll modify it. But that's part of his legacy that he'll have to, bear as something that the cardinals will consider in their thoughts.
Bob, Cardinal Parolin, in this square the other day, it was a mass for youth, and he wore a mitre that Pope Francis wore. I'm told by people who were there that it was...
Yeah, it was jarring.
It didn't quite play.
It was jarring with him. Well, some of the cardinals that I trust that I've been talking with here regret that the new cardinals don't know each other very much, and that's an internal church matter. But some of them have also said they're worried that some of the cardinals from the peripheries aren't that much aware of secular questions. And of course, the Chinese question is both a kind of a secular and an intra-church matter. To me, it's a great hindrance. I mean, you have to think through very carefully about Cardinal Parolin, why he did that. We know that Cardinal McCarrick also was involved in those negotiations. So what element was, I hope someday we'll find out what exactly that role was that he played. But it's not solely the fact that the cardinals are not aware of some of the controversies within the church or sensitive to them. I think they also need to be sensitive to the church in the world, and it'll be interesting to see if that element begins to emerge during the conclave as well.
There's some other candidates we're hearing about. Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, a Franciscan, who's navigated that very difficult place between the Palestinians and the Israelis with that fledgling Christian community that he's been trying to hold together. Your thoughts on his candidacy?
No, I think it's a serious candidacy. I think he's a serious man, a man of prayer. He's a man of belief. And he's a man who's had to exercise a political role in the sense of dealing with secular governments, trying to defend the interests of Christians, on the other hand, recognizing the horrors that have been perpetrated against the Israelis. He's a serious candidate in my book.
He's an Italian, which is an odd thing for a Patriarch of Jerusalem. He's an Italian, which they thought would never happen again after all the Palestinians were elected to that post. He's also a biblical scholar. I've known him for about 25 years. And he's just a very sober citizen. He's a realist, but he's also a man of deep faith. And he believes, in fact, that the Holy Land is the gospel and is the center of the church, which is an interesting conception considering where we're now and where he'll be voting in a few days.
Some people are objecting to the fact that he's young. He's about 60 something like that, right? We were talking about this the other day, you recall, and it just struck me that Pope John Paul II was elected at 58 years old, and God bless him. I mean, those years were great years for the Catholic Church and for the world. I mean, he helped to bring down communism in the Soviet Union. So I hope that fact, I mean, obviously, if you're going to elect someone who's younger, you're kind of saying we're going to expect you to be around for a while. But I hope that isn't a factor that plays too large a role. I think they ought to look very carefully at him and make a decision on the basis of who that person is and what they're likely to do in the role. And for my money, he's pretty strong.
Yeah, I think he could emerge as an important compromise candidate between the Italians and those who want to continue Francis's legacy and more traditionalists who are very concerned about the drift in the teaching and the doctrine and the clarity of the faith, particularly when you have all these young people coming to the faith all around the world, converting, wanting baptism. They're seeking something. They want something solid and lasting. They don't want this kind of felt banner guitar mask nonsense. Perpetual dialogue. Any predictions? By the next time we sit here, we will not be part of the live coverage of so many of these events here at EWTN. So we'll be back next Thursday. But my question is, do you have any predictions? Because when we next return, the conclave will have begun.
Not a prediction, but I can express a hope that we will get a cardinal who is going to return to the line of Catholic thinking and action that John Paul II and Benedict led us in. And one of the most inspiring figures in that is Cardinal Sarah from Guinea. So I pray that his influence in the election will be such that we get a cardinal who would reflect what Cardinal Sarah has also said, in his book, God or Nothing. The Catholic Church exists to promote God's teaching and presence in the world. Anything else is a distraction.
The Africans will have a big influence.
Yes,
That's
I think
the
that's
vibrancy in the
correct.
center
And I
of the
say
church.
amen to everything that you just said. If I had to predict, I wouldn't want to predict too much about who's going to be the next pope, but I think we're going to see a number of diverse voices between now and then. I'd be surprised if there is this kind of monochromatic, continuity sort of tone that comes out of the discussions in these general congregations. I think people are going to become a little bit bolder as we go along. There are going to be people supporting maybe some unlikely candidates, and it'll be an interesting thing when we reconvene.
Yeah, I can't wait. Gentlemen, Papal Posse, thank you for being here. It's an honor to always be with you. We will leave it there, but we'll have daily updates on the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube, the entire cast and crew here. I want to explore a few of the candidates that we just touched on today. We'll get into more depth there. Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, thank you as always, my friends.
Thank you,
for being
Raymond.
here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Yep. We'll reconvene soon.